Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Charlottetown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I should point out firstly that I will be splitting my time with the Honourable Member from King's Hants. I'm very pleased to rise today to speak on this issue because it is, I submit, a very important issue, and it goes right to the heart of our democracy and the role of the executive and Parliament within our democratic system. I will speak firstly, Madam Speaker, about the duties, responsibilities and obligations of members of Parliament individually and of Parliament collectively, or the House of Commons collectively. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, there is, I submit, and this is the heart of what I'm going to say, there is an obligation, a fundamental constitutional obligation on us individually and collectively to hold the executive to account. Our job is not to govern. Our job is to hold to account those that do govern. Basically, members of Parliament have four fundamental roles: approve, amend, or negate legislation, approve, amend, negate taxing measures, taxing legislation, approve or negate requests from the government for the appropriation of monies from the public purse through the estimates process, and fourthly and most importantly, Madam Speaker, to hold the executive to account. Ensure that they're fulfilling those roles and functions that have been delegated to them. And I believe in this debate, as we've seen from the last speaker who did not mention one word, one sentence dealing with this motion, we've lost sight of that very fundamental role. Some people here in the House talk about decorum, which is very important. But the more important issue, Madam Speaker, is for members of Parliament to do what they're supposed to do. Every member of Parliament, government and opposition, has a constitutional duty and a constitutional obligation to hold the executive to account. And all MPs, both government, are to blame in many instances. In some cases, opposition MPs emphasize too much in drumming up scandal, real or perceived. And at the same time, MPs from the government side toe the party line and read only the lines that are given to them in the morning by the Prime Minister's office. Right now, Madam Speaker, Parliament and democracy is under attack. This is why we've had two prorogations. We've had the long-form census travesty, the current international cooperation minister debacle, and now what's going on before this House, the motion that's before this House, is the absolute refusal of the executive to give the costing information about the crime bills and about the projections on the corporate tax cuts. Parliament, and again, Madam Speaker, these are simple costing measures that have always been available to Parliament and should be available to Parliament. Parliament has certain tools, and this was affirmed. It was all affirmed, Madam Speaker, in the recent ruling of Speaker Milligan, April of last year. And I'll quote, "Procedural authorities are categorically and repeatedly asserting the powers of the House in ordering the production of documents. No exceptions are made for any category of government documents, even those related to national security. But it must be remembered that under all circumstances, it is for the House to consider whether the reasons given for refusing the information is sufficient. The right of Parliament to obtain every possible information on public questions is undoubted, and the circumstances must be exceptional, and the reasons very cogent, when it cannot be at once laid before the Houses." And Madam Speaker, what we're talking about today is a very simple request for the costing, which is available. The deputy ministers have all acknowledged that this is available information. It's in the domain. It's circulated within the executive. That is one request, and the other request has to deal with the corporate tax cost projections. Very simple financial information. There is no reason, no constitutional reason, no legitimate reason, no public interest reason why this information is not being made available to Parliament. And I should point out, Madam Speaker, that all constitutional and procedural scholars agree with that premise. And Madam Speaker, this tool has been around for centuries. This really followed the creation of our Westminster system that started in and around the year 1208. It's a tool available to Parliament in fulfilling its constitutional duty to hold government to account. And Parliament, and I pointed out before, Parliament at all times has that overriding duty to act responsibly, to act in the public interest. And now, Madam Speaker, we have a situation where that tool, and I submit democracy itself, is under attack. We have a situation where this Prime Minister will do anything in his power to undermine Parliament. When he got elected first, he published a booklet advising Conservatives chair how to stop any progress in committees, to hold up committee meetings, shut them down, leave, adjourn, anything at all. He paroled Parliament twice. Any officers or senior public servants who disagree with them are blacklisted. Linda Keane, Paul Kennedy, Kevin Page, the list goes on and on and on. We had the Afghan detainee issue. That had to go to the highest office, the office of the Speaker, for a ruling. I've just quoted from it. The situation is very clear. Now we have before us the cost of the crime bills and projections dealing with corporate profits and corporate taxes. Nothing could be simpler. This is information that should be available to members of Parliament and parliamentary committees. And to say it's a cabinet confidence is not correct, Madam Speaker. But I should point out that in refusing this to Parliament, Parliament is the people. What the Prime Minister is saying here is Parliament doesn't count. But what he's also saying is the people don't count. If I want to give this information, I'll do it. And if I don't want to do it, I'm not going to do it. And it's none of Parliament's business. And more importantly, it's none of the public's business. I will do what I want to do, and it's none of their business.
He makes the rules.
And Madam Speaker, this is sad. We have a person in power who I submit has absolutely no respect for Parliament, the institutions of democracy, and the role of Parliament. And it is nothing less. It's not about the previous Speaker talking about tax cuts or talking about that or talking about seniors' pensions. It's nothing less than a frontal attack on democracy, democratic institutions, and the very foundations upon which this country was built and started in 1867. And this, Madam Speaker, is how countries get themselves in trouble. All it takes is for many people just to shrug their shoulders, do nothing. Well, I'm still getting my pension, the roads are still paved, we still have regular relative peace. I don't care. All it takes is for people to do nothing. And if Parliament is not functioning properly, this leads to a lesser country, lesser institutional integrity, more and more constant attacks. And it degrades the institutional integrity. It is, Madam Speaker, it's a vicious cycle. And I would urge all members of Parliament on both sides of the House, the institution, this is not a partisan issue, it's not a policy issue, it's the institution itself that's under attack. And there's an obligation on each and every one of us, individually and collectively, to stand up, to stand on our feet and protect this institution of Parliament. Madam Speaker, my suspicion is the motion will pass. But it will sadden me, Madam Speaker, when I see government MPs who took their oath of office to protect this institution vote against this very motion. Madam Speaker, unless and until we can get every member of Parliament to acknowledge his or her role within this institutions, Parliament and all its institutions will continue to degrade and depreciate. Madam Speaker, I think I've made my point clear. I think you understand how I'm going to vote in this motion, and I certainly welcome any questions.
And comments? The Honourable Member for Elmwood Transcona.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the government members who are speaking today are just simply trying to change the channel and hide from what they know is certainly wrong. They want to hide from what they actually criticized the previous government for. And in fact, I was at the Public Safety Committee hearing 2 nights ago on February 15th when we were discussing Bill C-59, the Abolition of Early Parole Act, and we had the member for Brampton West specifically asked the Deputy Minister of Public Safety, asked her about the costing of this bill. And he said specifically in answer, do you have that information? And asked her to provide it to the committee. And her response, the Deputy Minister's response, was, I have most of the information. It's part of my responsibility in terms of developing legislation to consider costs. Yes, I have most of the information and access to it. The question is, why can't she give out the information to the committee members in this House? Why? Because the government won't let her.
The honourable member for Charlottetown.
Well, Madam Speaker, what's taken place in some case in this debate, I think we're getting a little off track here, and we can talk about the minutiae of what happened in committees, we can talk about tax cuts and pensions and that, but we can lose sight of the forest for the trees. This issue, Madam Speaker, is an attack on Parliament. It's an attack on democracy. Parliament has the right to send for persons, papers and records. That's a fundamental right that every member of Parliament has a constitutional obligation to protect, and I hope they do it.
Questions and comments?
Member for Mississauga South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the reason that we have that right, Madam Speaker, is because bad things happen when there isn't proper scrutiny. And the evidence is in when the Liberals took over office in 1993 with inheriting a $42 billion deficit, that in order to balance the budget, there had to be substantial cuts to be able to save it. You cut 20% to save the 80. Otherwise, it's going to get much worse. So I guess the real issue is, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it, and it's important that we have this information, and it's important that we have respect for Parliament. So I guess if the member would, I'd ask him to respond to the, say, the assertion that we have as parliamentarians, we expect the government to be open, honest, transparent, and accountable, and this motion says not.
The honourable member for Charlottetown.
Well, Madam Speaker, to disagree slightly with the member, it's not a Liberal issue, it's not a Conservative issue, it shouldn't be a partisan issue. It is simply an attack on Parliament. Parliament has a duty to hold the executive to account. And one of those tools that is not developed in Canada, but it's been developed over the years, adopted in all Westminster systems, is that Parliament, in this duty to hold the government to account, has the right to send for persons, papers and records, or in other words, information. And in this case, that information, for no good reason at all, is being withheld from Parliament. And for that reason, this motion should pass.
Questions and comments? There's time for a very brief question. No? Resuming debate.